Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Network Virtualization channel. In this panel discussion, we would be touching on building the next generation network. And we have a stellar lineup of speakers today from PCCW Global, Metaswitch, Ooredoo, Verizon, Sri Lanka Telecom, and China Broadband Communications. Before I pass this over to our moderator, Shiv, I would like to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please post them into the live discussion area on the right side of your screen. Without any further ado, I would now like to pass this over to Shiv, who's the founder and principal analyst at Mandala Insights. Thanks, Shiv. Over to you.
Thank you, Shruti. And a warm good afternoon and perhaps good evening or good morning, depending on wherever you're logging in from. A very warm welcome to the audience. We have a great topic today, building the next generation network, SDN NFV transformations, and we have a stellar lineup of panelists as well. So I want to take a moment before we get into the main discussion to do a quick round of introductions and let our panelists, tell you about themselves in their own words. Let me start with myself. My name is Shiv Pucha. I am, as she said, the founder and principal analyst at Mandala Insights. We are an industry analyst firm focused on the next billion digital opportunities in the Asia Pacific region. But enough about me. Let's get to the stars of the show, and let's kick off with the panelists. Let me bring in Razib. Razib, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, Shiv, and hello, everyone. I'm Razib Islam. I'm working in Ooredoo, Qatar. I work particularly in relation to the fixed connectivity products in the business unit in relation to B2B, most enterprises and connectivity options and things like that. Thanks for bringing me in. Cheers.
Thank you, Razib. I want to now bring in Paul Camping. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gamp. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for PCCW Global.
Great. Thank you. Paul, where are you based? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I'm based in Brisbane, Australia.
Thank you. Ray Sung.
Thank you. My name is Ray Sang, and I represent Metaswitch. We're now a Microsoft company, and I'm responsible for the Asia Pacific business and based out of Hong Kong.
Thank you, Ray. Anuradha, over to you. You might be on mute.
Anuradha Udunora here, joining from Kandy, Sri Lanka. I work for Sri Lanka Telecom and working on enterprise solutions.
Thank you, Anuradha. Mandesh?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to join my panelists on this topic today. My name is Mandesh. I've been with Verizon for about 12 years, based in Singapore. I wear two hats. In my current role, I'm part of the product organization. I oversee the cybersecurity product strategy for Asia. I also drive the network product strategy for the Southeast Asia region.
Great, thank you, Mandesh. And last but not least, Andy, you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andy Yeo, and I'm based out of Singapore. I'm the head of sales for China Broadband Communication. We are a Chinese company based in Beijing. I'm leading the international sales team right now, and we spend most of our time helping our customers looking into issues on the internet, network topology, and we are very happy to be here talking to everyone.
Okay, great. So with that, let's actually get into the main topic about building the next generation network. So I wanted to start off by trying to set some context here for why telcos are attempting to build the next generation network. So one of the major trends in recent years is the imperative that telcos around the world are facing, which is the need to become digital service providers, for lack of a better word. But this has been a long journey. In the early years, very much focused on virtualization, and now increasingly focused also on becoming cloud native. So let's spend a little time digging into this. I want to start the round of questions and actually pose the first one to Ray. Ray, from your perspective at Metaswitch, is this something you agree with? What do you, from all the telcos that you talk to, is this something that they're trying to do with this transformation and become digital?
Yes, thank you, Shiv. So absolutely, I think most telcos, we see the main drivers primarily as the need to stay competitive long term. But to stay competitive, of course, the most kind of the lowest hanging fruit is to roll out new services to be able to capture new segments, or to get more revenue out of the same customer base. But I think part of that also means that with the ever-changing world we're in, and COVID is the great big example we're all living through, I think it's also about gaining that agility and that flexibility that comes from being able to react to new situations. And of course, that's not just technology, it's also about the people and the organization.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Paul, let me ask you the same question, but from your perspective as a telco, why is it imperative for telcos to build this next generation network? What are the key strategic considerations for your company as you attempt to undertake this transformation?
Thank you, Shiv. I think the imperative is driven by the transformation we see in the traffic patterns. We've seen the original use of networks being predominantly for private connectivity. And then as more and more value is delivered via SaaS applications, we see that demand for internet connectivity. Over the course of the last 5 years, as the hyperscale cloud providers, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS, could come to play such a prominent part in delivering value to the enterprise, as a telecommunications sector, we've needed to evolve into providing connectivity to those public clouds. And unlike traditional connectivity where we can do a network-to-network interface with a physical cross-connect, to connect an enterprise to a public cloud requires software as well as network integration. And that transformation in terms of capability of a telecommunications provider, needing to be an expert in software and in network, is what's driven the demand for, in PCCW Global's case, to become an agile-driven transformation. Because as Ray mentioned, it's certainly much more than just a technology transition, it's a cultural transition. And we've adopted the Scaled Agile framework to guide us as we transition into an agile company.
Great, thanks, Paul. Razib, I want to ask you a question following up from what Paul just said. So if service providers like yourself are moving towards more of a software-driven approach, are there specific triggers that are driving this shift? Can you talk about this perhaps from your own experience or trends that you're seeing, in the broader telco space?
Thanks, Shiva. I think it's a good question because from an operator perspective, there are drivers, certain drivers that we are looking through. Apart from my current job experience, I was working in different operator set as well. So what I've actually seen, the main drivers that you can summarize, the service agility might be one of the main ones, and followed by the flexibility that bringing in the softwareization approach could bring about and give the flexibility of network augmentation or service creation as needed based on capacity requirements. To Ray's point, I think COVID was one of the catalysts, as we can see right now, that the bandwidth definition and the traffic pattern got changed as well. So that bring about the immediate attention to be met there, and that SDN or softwareization or NFV-centric approach could cater that as well from an operator's perspective. Also, the vendor neutrality is another one of the big questions that we need to solve in this particular case, and the ecosystem of making sure that we can play the mix and match of different vendors on a common sort of platform, be able to actually leverage all the advantages and flexibility that each of them offers, while not locking ourselves in a vendor locked way or from a network strategic point of view. Time to productization is another one which telco is, I think most of the telcos would agree with that it takes certain amount of time to bring about a product, and how could we speedify that make sure that we bring about those digital transformation in place. From an enterprise perspective, I think connecting to the enterprise customers, I think user experience from their point of view is one of the concerns that we have in terms of the latency, quality of service, traffic backhauling, all those issues. And also the centralized sort of way of managing the resources and also the creating that intelligence platform of the control there is the ability for us to actually bring about those flexibility, user experiences, and digital transformation to make it happen. And this needs to go in hand with the cloud sort of native or agility that we provide in together with that one. I think I might want to touch that later on, but the competitive drive, to Paul's point, from a network strategic point of view, is telcos another concern with the hyperscalers. How do we play about it and make sure that we leave our own rates? So that's more or less the summary.
Thanks, Razib. That's quite a few objectives from a telco point of view to try to get through. But I'm curious, as we look across sort of the Asia Pacific region, it's a very diverse region, quite a range of service providers, by market, by category. I want to pose this next question perhaps to Mandesh and Anuradha. Can you comment on the approaches that US service providers are taking? Is it incremental, staggered, or are you actually looking at kind of a big bang transformation? What are the business considerations that drive your choice of approach? Mandesh, let me pose this to you first, and then I'll come to Anuradha.
Yeah, sure. So there's definitely an element of a staggered or incremental transformation, with the move towards virtualization services that's happened before. We've seen carriers choose between software-defined capabilities in the core or at the edge where it's customer-facing. But the real business consideration here is about where to place the valuable capital and effort is to look at the customer. What are customers asking for? What are their expectations? Will this drive adoption of strategy for new services? It's a case of, let's listen to the voice of the customer. So when we look at further, we're considering our customers, are they looking at high bandwidth? Is it a flexibility to decrease capacity, to some type of self-serve portal? Do we have that underlying network that's capable of supporting that flexibility as well? Our customers looking to enable, disable microservices on CPE or edge platform at the branch office. Are they looking to pivot due to remote workforce or changes in traffic patterns to cloud? So, are there performance expectations with their application? This notion now is 20 milliseconds sufficient, because this would drive the architectural design of the solution. This application needs to sit at the edge, and more importantly, can we support that? So it comes down to what are the drivers the customers are looking at, and that would shape our strategy to support it. So I think as we speak further today, we're probably going to start sifting out these variances that we're seeing from customers, and more importantly is how are we as an industry responding with our strategy.
Thanks, Mandesh. Anuradha, from your perspective, unlike some of the other, unlike some of your other telco colleagues on the panel, you're focused on Sri Lanka. Is it a similar thing for you, or are there? Maybe you could talk about it a little bit from that perspective as well, and if that influences your approach.
Yes, our approach is basically something we understand is that if you take the changes that are happening external to the telcos and also in the ecosystem, and things like the other gentleman talked about, the traffic increasing, customer demand, customer expectations, all that, these things change very rapidly. So it's very difficult for us. It's not for us, for any telco to do long-term planning like we used to do in the past. So the plans are like very, very short-term plans, and whether you go for an incremental or staggered or big bang, it's up to the telco themselves, depending on their own circumstances. Like, for example, if you take Rakuten in Japan, or if you take Jio in India, they are kind of sort of big bang changes in the transformations. but I don't think that all the telcos are not Rakutens or Geos. So they have their own way of looking at it and their own problems and different skills, all the other things which are need to be in place to sort of take this approach. But what is more important is to have you keep going. Like even though you have a short plan, have the plan correct and keep on going more in a incremental approach. So because transformation is not an end to itself. Transformation is a journey. So you keep on going in that journey, and it's very important that you keep going, looking at your short-term plans and short-term goals. That's my view.
Thanks. Just to clarify, it sounds like you're saying if you have legacy infrastructure, then that obviously influences the approach and the decision that you're taking.
Yes, of course. If you take any incumbent telco, for example, like Sri Lanka Telecom, most of them, they have their legacy stuff, like not necessarily legacy networks, but we have all these legacy thinking as well. Take the human factor. So you might be able to transform the network, like changing your circuit switching to packet switching and going cloud native and containers. But it's very difficult to transform your thinking, which is actually you have been inherited for the last 160 or 165 years. So we have this people factor and the technology factor. I think most of the panelists would agree that the people factor is the most difficult, because you're talking about humans and a sort of a culture change within organizations.
Thanks. Andy, coming to you. In your role, you're very customer facing, and you have, of course, strong focus on China. I'm curious, do your customers in China have unique requirements as they look to go beyond to ASEAN and the world? And if so, how is China Broadband helping them do this?
Okay, so thanks, Shiv. I'm just going to address a little bit from some of the earlier comments as well, and also to add my view into this. I think when we speak about drivers, it's very important to understand that we as telcos, or I rather see ourselves as IT companies now, we are looking at our end customers and how are they serving their customers? How do they want to serve their current customers? If you look at our customers today, in fact, most of our customers are international MNCs from the US, from Europe, from ASEAN, who have big investments into China. And basically China, as we all know, is a big market. It's a 14 trillion GDP domestic market, where international firms are selling into this huge consumer base. And 900 million people are basically online in China, buying stuff online, doing transaction online. So we look at how our customers want to assess this pool of customer in a faster manner, in a more efficient manner, and how we as an IT company can help to support them. Now, the whole ecosystem is very interesting, because right now, during the pandemic, people are commenting in the press that the logistics company are booming, healthcare company is booming. My personal opinion is that we need to find a way to support whatever the assistance of the human race, as well as the assistance of industries, right? So IT services is a part of this whole entire ecosystem, right? And as we look at how we are going to build our next generation network, it is important to identify how these customers are going to serve their partners, their existing customers, which we talk a lot about the performance on the internet, multi-cloud strategy, as well as also site-to-site communication, because it is still important that in certain business and in certain industries, there is still that need for manufacturing side, for the retail sites to be vibrant and to be operational. And the last part I'd like to touch on is a very important focus in terms of the people, right? So we in CBC believe a lot in investing and hiring people who know how to deal in this very diverse market right now. Of course, our focus is still in China. We are looking to grow in ASEAN and in Asia, and to serve our customers out here in ASEAN Asia. We are already looking at investments from a technology standpoint to be in the cloud and to have access in Singapore. But more importantly is the people that we are hiring to serve our customers. And I'm not talking only about salespeople. We look at also our operation support, our service, our project delivery, not just in terms of their skill set, but also in terms of their market knowledge and how are they supporting this group of customers. For example, I myself, even at this age, I'm learning a third language. I'm learning to speak Spanish because the market is not going to be, whether it's a Chinese market or a European market or an American market, there's going to be a lot of diversity. There's going to be a lot of interlinkage. We need people who really understand and who is willing to upgrade themselves. And we also introduce digital transformation within our own CBC for our employees to really understand how do they operate in the digital world, even more so right now in this post-pandemic world.
Thanks, Andy. That was great. I want to now that we've spent some time and hopefully set the context for why this transformation is happening. Let's try to get into some specifics. Building the next-gen network is not an easy project. Many of the service providers that I speak to constantly keep referring to it as a journey. So let's try and break this down with some specifics. I want to ask a first set of questions, and let me start with Mandesh and Paul. Mandesh, let me start with you. I've just spoken about how this has been a journey and probably a pretty long one. How do you rate the success of telcos in this regard? What has worked, what hasn't, and perhaps just going a little further, is there a playbook of sorts that telcos can follow? Why don't you start, and then I'll go to Paul next. Mandesh, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I was. Thanks for that, Shiv. So I think a lot of these customer deployments have been largely successful, which is a testament to the industry, which has been diligently working on improving the product offering. We see solution architects now designing customer networks where they include some type of virtualized service, and it's a default design option. It wasn't really do we want to add it? It's more of it's a requirement that we're seeing from the customer itself. So there's a lot more adoption in the market. What we've also noticed is there are different routes taken by carriers in their virtualization efforts. We've seen one route, which is maybe one of the quickest to market, which is to resell technology outright from a vendor. Another approach is to build an orchestration platform and with APIs into ordering, billing, reporting, ticketing as well. Now, orchestrating these capabilities for the different use cases is not trivial from a hardware software point of view, and it's fraught with challenges for sure. There needed to be a scale in which we would deliver the service, which would eventually make it profitable as well. So we saw a lot of different approaches by carriers. Some of the early challenges encountered. Some came from hardware that was being deployed for virtualized services. In those days, vendors weren't necessarily compatible with one another. The other challenge we saw came in stitching service chains together. These are combination of services that customers are looking for. For example, combination of firewall and routing. There could be a Fortinet or a Viptela. So we've seen significant amount of time and effort spent on building and then testing these service chains, verifying which version of the software works with one another, ensuring its compatibility as well. So plus, because we are seeing customers making a large shift to cloud-based offering, the telecom players have been successful in virtualization space, and now even talking about that cloud-native conversation as well. So we are definitely seeing a kind of diversification in the market within the industry at the moment, kind of an evolution of sorts. We're seeing some players moving at different stages of that value chain into that application layer. So there's definitely a big movement happening in the market there.
Okay. Thanks, Mandesh. Paul, would you agree with that? Or do you have a slightly different perspective, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you, Shiv. My perspective is somewhat reflective of Mandesh's observations. operating as a carrier myself, and I'd like to comment a little bit on Andy's observation about how we need to observe what our users are trying to do. So I joined PCCW Global 3 years ago when a company called Console Connect was acquired by PCCW Global, and I've had the opportunity of integrating that software architecture into the existing PCCW Global network. I think for many of us, when we think of SDN, we're drawn back to 2015 and Stanford University and the evolution of OpenFlow as a protocol to separate the control plane from the data plane. And pragmatically, I think that the approach we've taken at PCCW Global, particularly with the integration of Console Connect, is to look at what is our user trying to achieve. And in many cases, the users are already connected to our network, and therefore a complete lift and shift, replacing our existing network with a vendor who may work well with an SDN controller, really doesn't represent the value. The value of these networks that we all operate is in the physical deployment and the physical connectivity that exists. So we took the approach to pragmatically program the existing network and mirror the existing behaviors and patterns of the large-scale network that PCCW Global operates today. So we did that heavy lifting ourselves. We built our own microservices software architecture so that we could do what our users wanted to do. And what we learned was that our users wanted to use their existing connectivity to our network and also get connectivity that would take them through to the large hyperscale cloud providers. And because Console Connect is as much a software-defined networking application as it is a social network, what we discover is that in many cases, the more users who sign up for the platform, the more value that platform represents to everybody in the network. So we don't always know, as Andy mentioned earlier, we don't always know which SaaS application or which video conferencing suite or which collaboration tool is going to be important to some enterprise in Sri Lanka. But if we put them on a platform and allow them to connect to each other automatically, arguably doing software-defined networking, we've achieved the outcome for our users that they wanted to achieve. And that's being privately and securely connected to a mission-critical application, whether it be on-prem or in cloud. So I think we need to rethink our definition of SDN, and particularly around, is it really just a tool to get us to the outcome that we're trying to achieve for our users? And certainly in PCCW Global's case with Console Connect, we were able to do that with our existing network, but certainly taking the company on an agile transformation, but not having to change the underlying infrastructure.
Thank you, Bob. Andy, I think I saw your hand up, so maybe a quick follow-up?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to add to the comment from Mandesh and also from Paul. I think it is very important today as we see a lot of our customers, and we also need to identify the difference in terms of the cloud from our enterprise customer. Internationally, we all know, it's the few big names that we know, AWS, the Google, Azure. But when you look at China, it's a different market. It's a completely different market in the cloud business. We have Alibaba, Tencent Cloud over there. And that's just taking two scenarios, right? If you look at the world itself, I think many more and different kind of cloud is probably going to evolve. And we are looking at how do we then the word I will use is neutral, right? We become a party that understands and know how to help our customers integrate among the different kind of technology, different kind of software as a service. So we in CBC actually have been starting to talk to different partners in the ecosystem. I think when we talk about Fortinet, Zscaler, some of these big names, we are working in the background to really understand and use our fabric to enable multi-cloud connection, but also to optimize the quality of the performance when we assess this kind of application. And I think that is truly important to our enterprise customers today.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for that. So just moving on to the same kind of theme, I want to pose a slightly different kind of question, and maybe this one I'll pose it to Anuradha and Razib. Anuradha, let me start with you. I want to ask you, so has the virtualization narrative been replaced by a need to go cloud native? If these are actually complementary efforts, perhaps in your opinion. Can you talk about how these will manifest in your network transformation? I'm curious. I'm thinking about where would you need containers, where do you need VNFs, and how do you strike this balance? Let's start with you, Anuradha, and then I'll pose the same question to Razib as well. Okay.
Thanks, Shiv. I think if you take this network functions virtualization, and it is one of the tools that we use together with SDN and cloud, and which defines this whole softwareization thing. Now, that was the thing we were talking about like a couple of years back. Now we're talking about this cloudification, all these announced sort of processes, softwareization, cloudification, now containerization and all that. So network functions virtualization is almost like if you take the HCNFV first white paper, it's almost 6 years old. Now, if you really take the adaptation of NFV especially in the telco domain, we are not as an ecosystem. I think as an ecosystem, we are not quite happy with the adoption of NFV. And you might have seen that recently some group came out with the idea of this lean NFV, especially looking at the sort of interworking aspects of NFV components in the HCNFV Nano architecture. So they're introducing these key value systems, so more of a software-based approach to NFV, and making it sort of lean to make the adaptation quick. So whether it is NFV or VNFs, which are the virtual network functions, or the containers, it's I think we will have to live with both containers and virtual network functions. And going forward, you don't know these containers, this concept of containers, because actually there's nothing called containers. It's all software code after all. So this idea or the whole notion of containers might also change going forward. So we might come out with something else as well. So whether it is a virtual network function or a container or something else, we're talking about actually looking at these traditional network functions in a more software-based approach. So I think it's all comes back to your software skills, your software knowledge, and your software education. So I think it's a long journey, and those who have not started it, I think it's the best time to start it. Like sometimes you might want to leapfrog from virtual network functions to just start adopting cloud native, but it's up to the telcos.
Thank you. Razib, do you have a perspective on this as well?
Sure. Sorry, I got disconnected. Anuradha's point, I think I mostly agree with what he was pointing out in relation to the telco's journey towards this, but would like to actually add few parameters here, because when we say cloud native, that's basically we are looking at coming up with a approach of microservices based in a containerized environment. And when we say container, that's basically we are trying to make it portable, lightweight, and making sure that it can be spinning up in a VM with the associated libraries, operating systems, everything in it. It's a packaged software environment that we want to actually put in. So the whole benefit realization of SDN or NFV, SDN talks about the centralization of the control lines, separation of control plane from the data plane, while NFV part of it, as rightly said by Anuradha, is looking at some of the basically the resource sort of centralization, resource management, or the network functions management, like VNFs, as you pointed out in your question. So both of these basically make up the whole building blocks. But when we try to actually do this, SDN more or NFV, though they more look at the network-centric sort of infrastructural approach in a softwareized way, in a virtualized world. And when we say cloud native, that's the advantage that we want to get out of this network infrastructure side of things, the application side of things. Cloud native talks about the application side of things, because we want to move to a modular approach or microservice-based approach so that it makes it easier for us from a CI/CD or production site lifecycle point of deployment scenarios, make necessary modification, come out with particular functionalities, modify, upgrade in seconds, make sure that we talk to the clouds in a same agile way. So that, to my understanding, I think they need to go complementary with hand in hand. But there is a concept of SDN native. Once you create that infrastructure building block in a softwareized world, that's what we call SDN native. So SDN native needs to be there before you bring in the applications. So if for a particular operator environment, what we are struggling with is we have a legacy sort of environment right now and little bit of leap towards softwareization. So that's kind of a mixed environment. So so to realize the full benefits of cloud native, I think the SDN native is the key. That needs to be established first, and then we can go in the journey of cloud native, or selectively appoint those applications which has established the platform of SDN native first before leaping the whole mixed sort of legacy plus SDN compatible environment into that journey, because that would be too fast to go into that road, and that would create the operational complexities.
Thanks, Razi. Andy, want to pose a question to you. You know, as I'm curious, so what are some of the specific, perhaps network features or services that you're trying to enable, you know, for your customers? Well, what are they asking for, and more importantly, what are they paying for?
Sure. I think as many of us here know, in China is still a very unique market in the international world in terms of the, I would say from a regulatory perspective. So we want to help our customers to be compliant in the way they operate their business. And therefore, internet performance is one of the top issue that we help our customers to resolve. And secondly is also the ability to access some of these enterprise SaaS, for example, Microsoft Office 365, for example, Teams, you know, which is very important in terms of the communication. As many, especially in this, you know, during this lockdown period, this year alone, we have seen the amount of communication and the traffic on the internet going up, the usage of it going up. And we want to help our customer, number one, to be efficient in this area in terms of the quality itself. And number two, we need to keep them compliant, right? That is very, very important. I mean, compliance is one of the most critical issues that is very close to most of our customer heart. They are international MNCs. They are operating in different countries, right? So we not just, and right now, even CBC, we are looking into expanding to Singapore and ASEAN. You know, again, ASEAN is a very diverse market, right, with different rules and regulation. Based on the experience that we have gained from operating in China, we now want to replicate that experience, the ability to support our customers effectively and compliant. I think that's where we are looking at. Number two, we are also very aware from the feedback that we gathered from our customers that the multi-cloud connection is another important aspect, right? So we have tweaked our network in such a way that it will be able to support a lot of this multi-cloud connection. And last but not least, again, from a network perspective, the kind of features that our customers are looking for, enabling them to move things that are on-prem, for example, firewall, or to any other form of security, into the WAN or into the cloud, so to speak, right? So that they will be able to operate their business not just effectively, but also secure in that manner. So I think that's where our business focus are today.
Thanks, Andy. Ray, I want to come to you. Yeah, so I think you speak to a lot of telcos around the region. You know, I'm curious. Have you observed a shift in mindset? You know, when we spoke earlier, one of the things we were talking about is how telcos need to move from perhaps a more traditional RFP procurement kind of mindset and become much more agile. Are you actually seeing this this shift? And you know, are they moving towards a more software agile approach?
Yes, and I think based on a lot of comments from the other other panelists, it's clear that every telco is going to kind of move at their own speed. I think the NFV phase that has been happening for the last few years is the first time that a telco is confronted with the concept that when you buy something, it's not going to all come from the single vendor. You know, this is the first step of starting to see things being broken up, perhaps at a very high level between hardware and software, but really is between different component pieces to make the whole thing work. And I think that is the first step that challenged the telco industry to start thinking about this journey. But I think the results of NFV is also a little bit mixed. I think for some telcos it has gone very well. For some it has been a very challenging learning experience. And as I mentioned in my previous comment, I think part of that is the readiness of the organization to absorb such a massive change. Now, some telcos kind of try to patch this by basically relying more on a system integrator that kind of sits in between. So instead of going to buy from the traditional very large vendors, they say now, hey, you know, I'm going to find an SI to glue it for me and do the same thing. But I think that is another lesson that some of the telcos may have to go through to realize that, as some of the comments from Paul and from Mandesh has mentioned, it's not so much just a technical change in a procurement process. It's also the telco's own culture and people that needs to get used to kind of working in a very different way. And I think we still have a ways to go as an industry. Now, I think the silver lining of this, the light at the end of the tunnel, is I think this is not surprise to a lot of the telco senior leadership. I think this is now well known. It's a matter of how fast can the organization move, and you know, in their own individual dynamics and the drivers, how can they make that shift?
Great, thanks, Ray. And I think that's a good segue for us to actually talk about some of these organizational challenges. I mean, it's a theme that seems, I think, pretty much all of the speakers have referred to it at one point of time or the other. So maybe let's dig into that a little bit. Again, I want to pose a question. Anuradha, let me start with you. So, you know, on this journey, we've all talked about how much internal change also needs to happen, but just kind of getting a little more specific, is there a major gap in skill sets, or is it training? You know, can you talk about what some of the internal gaps are possibly, and how are telcos like yourself, what are you doing to try to bridge this gap?
Now, if you take gaps are everywhere, like if you take, there are certain gaps in the technology regard to standards, maturity of standards, and vendor supporting standards and vendor openness, etc. So that is the technology side. And also specific to telcos, being large organizations, they also have certain gaps with regard to processes. Like traditional telcos, they try to sort of run the same processes. We need to look at the processes in a more holistic way, and we need to sometimes simplify some of the processes, and also to get rid of some of the processes which are actually staying there as roadblocks in the transformation. And if you take aside the technology and the processes, then the most important factor in this transformation is the people. Now, as we, like, if you take Shiv, like if you take this whole transformation thing, I would say it's for telcos, it is more on software. So it's a more of a software transformation. I know there are business transformation, there are technology transformations with regard to customers, products, etc. But if you take a fundamental transformation viewpoint, this is a more of a software transformation for telcos. So when it comes to software, you're not talking about hardware. Of course, there are hardware, but we are more talking about the software skills. So who's going to handle software is your team, it's your people, right? So if you don't have the right skills, knowledge, and education, with regard to your people, who can handle software and understand software, think software, then that is where the major challenge is. So it's not easy, but that is the major challenge. So if you have the right set of people, I think you are a system integrator yourself, because otherwise what will happen is like you as a telco will just have to run the commercial operation. Rest of the things you'll have to, of course, ask a system integrator to do, because you don't have that skills. So going forward, I think you can get the support of vendors and system integrators in the middle run, but long run, I think you need to sort of in-house build those skills for you to survive in this whole transformation.
Thanks, Anuradha. Razib, would you agree with that? Anuradha's comments about sort of software being the biggest challenge. I mean, or are there perhaps other gaps that are equally or more important?
I think Anu is spot on that one. Basically, we did go through this sort of migration journey in my previous work experiences, and found the immediate question is, from a telco operator perspective, we cannot shake off the whole legacy environment. When it comes a question of decoupling the hardware from the software and network abstraction side of things, and we want to achieve the vendor neutrality, and we want to play style. So what we have in hand, the skill sets point of view, do we have that culture of softwareization in-house as a telco operator? That's the prime question to ask. From an operations perspective, because telco OpEx point of view might actually go down, but think about the amount of people that needs to actually be upgraded, trained, and be adhered to that environment of innovation, culture, of understanding each other in an operational sort of environment. Operations, when we had a chat with the operations team internally in a telco's environment, their question was pretty much, how do we adopt this technology from day one? Because we need to meet our KPIs, we need to meet our SLAs. So while doing that, one of the opportunities that we wanted to look at, like Anu pointed out, like whether we could come up with an interim approach of bringing in some of the system integrators who is supposed to be vendor neutral. They just want to work with us, and we learn along the way. And in a more agile fashion, train our internal resources. And as a part of the network strategy roadmap, set some timeline for us to actually get trained from a DevOps perspective, sandboxing perspective, CI/CD side of environments need to be taken care of. The operational KPIs need to be made up, while we take a segmented approach, like one part of the networks could be SDN driven, and make sure that we are able to actually deliver from that part of the segment, and try and understand our success and failures from there, take up the gaps, fill in our product lifecycle understanding, how could we fill in those skill gaps and scenarios or fault mechanisms, what were the gaps. Maybe one of the immediate ways to actually take care, go hand in hand with system integrators, and also understand the legacy sort of infrastructure that we have with the vendor environment, like the vendor proprietary sort of roadmap, and understand how could we open that up from an open sort of point of view, open sourcing point of view, because that's another puzzle to solve. Sometimes the vendors, with due respect, they have their plugins, adapters, and softwareization approach, everything, but that is one form of closed way of openness. So because they need their specific software plugins and environments to upgrade those sort of environments. So how do we do that? Those are the challenges that we need to face.
Great, thank you, Razib. One of the other areas that I always think about when considering service providers and internal changes is the sort of the need to become more open. I don't just mean embrace, we're talking about software a lot, so I'm not just talking about embracing open source efforts, but also working increasingly with external partners, vendors, new vendors, even hyperscalers and others. Paul, can I ask you this first? Would you agree with that? And maybe you could give an example from your own experience at PCCW?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some irony in the fact that a lot of the networks, the panel that we see here, are actually deeply integrated and have had hundreds of years of collaboration to build the international telecommunications network that we're all able to have this conference over today. So I think as a community, we've understood the benefits of collaboration and for hundreds of years. The change really now, though, is that the type of relationship is moving from that physical NNI, network to network interface, into an API. And we do see some great work happening in the community where we can see standards authorities beginning to emerge. PCCW Global has done a substantial amount of work with MEF, not only to certify our network, but to also do proof of concepts about where we think the next form of collaboration needs to happen. So a lot of those standards, whether it be the Lifecycle Orchestration Sonata API, which PCCW Global has implemented and integrated with a number of our partners. Verizon, for example, we integrate with at an API level. CBC, we integrate with at an API level. So part of getting that network elasticity is about moving the layer of integration from layer 2 and 3 up to layer 7 so that we can have that ability to orchestrate the networks. Culturally, from an open source perspective, and having been a part of the open source community for more than 30 years, that collaborative, innovative, agile attitude, which I think Mandesh and Razib both mentioned, is core to that ability to accelerate our ability to generate value for our users. So open source is as much about the licensing of intellectual property as it is about a collaborative, constructive dialogue about the best possible outcomes, whether it be for APIs or code or for communities. And I think that transformation is certainly happening here at PCCW Global. And we've done that through investing in our team in 3 areas. So agile education. So I mentioned earlier, we've adopted the Scaled Agile framework. Almost half of PCCW Global is now certified in Agile. We invested in training them about the public cloud providers, and that can be Elite Cloud and Tencent Cloud and AWS, really to ensure that everybody in our community understood how people were using technology. It's difficult for Andy and I to sell to a customer if they don't understand what they're trying to achieve. So being a community now familiar with what you can do in AWS and what you can do in Google helps us understand about how our network can achieve outcomes for our users. And then finally, that software piece. Whilst it may be brilliant to have a developer who can orchestrate a microservice for you and deliver a fantastic CI/CD pipeline, if that developer has no understanding of what a layer 2 service is, their ability to achieve the right outcome is quite limited. So we've really ensured that our community of existing network engineers have access to that software skills, because the best outcome for us is a network engineer who can do the automation.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute, I think. Thanks, Paul. Mandesh, would you agree with that? Anything different to add?
Yeah, so I think if we go back 5 or 6 years ago, when Verizon first adopted OpenStack as its premise to build out our NFV product and services, and like Paul alluded to, we were all as an industry contributing to the community quite heavily. Now, and when we launched the NFV a few years ago, one of the early questions we were getting from the customers was, can I host my application in your environment, in your virtualized environment? And the answer was, we couldn't support it then. The infrastructure and the use of the hypervisors weren't allowing us to provide that customer experience we wanted to by hosting that customer application. But that's changed now. And I think the timing of the event is probably very timely, because I'm able to share a bit more detail around what we're doing in this space. So we've made some changes in our infrastructure, but we're not doing it alone either, right? So if you just go back to last week, Verizon announced a partnership with Nokia and Microsoft. And a few weeks before that, we announced a partnership with AWS. Now, the premise of the partnership with Nokia was to focus on technology to build out private 5G for our customers in EMEA and Asia. And with Microsoft and AWS, we're partnering with them to expand our MAC capability, or our multi-access edge computing capability. So let's kind of stitch that together, right? So Verizon's a traditional telco, moved into virtualization space and deployed SD-WAN and FV, and we're now creating all these partnerships. How does this work together? So if you look at it last week as well, we announced the availability of our managed Kubernetes platform. Now the managed Kubernetes capability is to support customers who have been looking to host applications on the edge of the network. Now this could be, what's the definition of edge here, right? This could be a universal CPE at the premise of a branch. It could be an edge computing location at the base of a radio access network. Now, these options allow that application to sit closer to the end user and closer to the end customer. So it will significantly lower that latency and help customers manage applications that are a bit more bandwidth intensive. Now, overall, it will kind of improve the end user experience. So as we move beyond network virtualization, partnerships will become important because they're trying to build out some of these new capabilities. And I know I said this earlier as well, that there's an evolution that's afoot, because as we try to deliver these new services into that application layer, which is where we're looking to get to.
Thanks, Mandesh. We're coming close to the top of the hour now, so I don't want to round this great discussion out without talking about how we're going to secure the next gen network as well. Ray, let me pose the first question in this sort of discussion area to you. One of the concerns raised frequently by enterprise customers is around the security of their networks as workloads move to the cloud and so on. From your perspective at Metaswitch, how are you able to help your telco customers in this regard?
So thank you for that. So I think from our perspective, traditionally, one of the key ways that we help our customer is to proactively monitor and very, very quickly share new threat vectors that comes against any of our hundreds of installations around the world with our telco customers. So when we see an attack happening and we see that that has some impact, we will very quickly publish those type of learnings to the community of our user group. That has served us very well. We have very, very, in fact, I'm not aware of any instance of security breaches on a Metaswitch network that are of consequence. However, I think we also all know that security is an area of a bit of an arms race. So we come out with better protection, and the bad actors will come up with more creative ways to gain access. So I think that the next couple of years, we're going to see a shift towards the state-of-the-art security implementation framework, which is basically a zero trust model. So you basically secure every single component, software components inside the network, so that you're not dependent on the traditional telco kind of hard shell approach where there's an outside domain versus an inside one. You basically accept that maybe some components will be compromised, and maybe even compromised from within, but that's not going to kind of quote unquote infect the rest of your network. I think this is a big area of investment for all of us, and it's going to take some time to evolve because as telco organizations, we tend to have very large scale networks that will take time to kind of build up those resilience. But I think zero trust is really the long-term picture.
Thank you, Ray. Now, Andy, final word to you. You talked previously about the bundled services you're offering to your customers. Can you talk a little quickly about how you're packaging security for your customers?
Yes, definitely. We are looking to look at our SD-WAN fabric and to be able to offer from what we call moving from the LAN to the WAN, right? Enabling a lot of our customers to be able to move some of these security features into the cloud or into the WAN itself. Now, another layer that we are also looking at itself is on our infrastructure. We are looking at partnering with different kind of partners to basically secure our own infrastructures, right? From a diversity standpoint, obviously we're building different points of presence around the world, But as we talk about the next generation network, it's no longer just about different points of presence. It's also about access to different technology, right? I think the next big word that is coming along in the industry is 5G, where it's not just affecting our customers. Just now we spoke about the top line, which is how are they addressing their end customer. But our enterprise customer is also looking at the bottom line, right? How are they making sure that their business is operating at the lowest cost possible, right? That's all what a CEO thinks about every day, right? So with 5G coming along, with IoT, the next big word coming along, which is already here, in fact, right? We are looking at different kind of solution from urban cities, smart cities, to predictive maintenance. Those are the next things that we are already starting to look into, and to make sure that it's not only from a network perspective that is secure. When our customers go into this type of solution, they have, because you are talking about API integration, you're going to have a lot of data transmission. Let's just take a predictive maintenance project, right? You take tons of data about a particular instrument, trains or cars, for example, personal information about the driver, right? So all this becomes really important in the way that our network technology team is designing our network today.
Thanks, Andy. I think we're just about out of time here, but I want to at least try to get to one question. And let me do that. This is from Bernard Lim. Multi-cloud and 5G, what is the future of SDN in this space? In the interest of time, let me just send it to one of you, maybe Mandesh. Would you like to take a quick?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it really short as well. So as we look at multi-cloud and 5G, we need to add MAC into that conversation as well, which is the edge computing, because all these three elements work together. So you have 5G operating from the radio network to that endpoint, which could be an autonomous vehicle. And with 5G, you get that latency, you get the great bandwidth. Customers now look to deploy applications at the MAC to kind of minimize the response time of the application to the endpoint. So a lot of heavy analytics of the application is still going to happen in the cloud footprint, in the core cloud footprint. But at the edge, we could see stuff like mapping or graphic rendering happening to kind of fully utilize the 5G network. So what do we deploy at the edge? Then it's going to be a combination of virtualized services, containerized, Kubernetes. All of those services are going to be available at the edge, which then different customers can combine the cloud footprint, the edge, and that 5G technology as well.
Great, thank you, Mandesh. And with that, I think we're just about out of time. So I want to bring this great panel to a close. I thank Ray, Anuradha, Mandesh, Andy, Razib, and Paul. Thank you all for your time today. Shruti, over to you.
Thank you, Shiv. What a great session. Thank you to all the speakers as well. A big thank you to all our sponsors as well, PCCW Global as well as MetaSwitch. For the audience, if you have any more questions for our speakers as well as sponsors, please do remember to visit our sponsor stands at the exhibition hall, and also do reach out to our speakers directly. Thank you once again, guys. Our next session would be starting shortly, and this would be delivered by CenturyLink, and it's by Chris Rezentas. So thank you very much. Please stay tuned. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.